Well, hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Jason Cusick. I'm the lead pastor here at Journey of Faith. And if you are new with us, maybe this is your first time at church or you're coming back to church after a season of being away, I want to say a special welcome to you. Those also at our Torrance campus. Let's give it up for our Torrance campus. Hi, everybody. Great that we can be connected like this. Also, if you're watching online, thanks for joining us. We're in week 4 of a series we're calling Finding Home in the Unknown. What we're doing as a church is we're going through about 100 stories through the entire Bible that are in different time periods. And so as we're going through these stories, we're finding ourselves in different eras of biblical history. And the period of time we're in right now is popularly called the exile. And what's happening during this time in Bible history is God's people, after hundreds of years of disobedience, are now being corrected and disciplined by God. They are deported out of the land of Israel into enemy territory. So they are now residing behind enemy lines in a different culture with people speaking a different language, and they're wondering, God, what do you want from us here? The initial prayer that they had was, get us out of here. And what we've been learning is God has been saying to them, no, I actually want you here, and I want you to flourish here, and I want you to learn how to thrive in the midst of difficulty and unknown and unexpectedness. And so what we're doing is we're looking at some of these stories and seeing what lessons we can learn from God's people who find themselves in places they don't want to be. And that's how it relates to us too, that we end up in situations in life where we don't want to be. We're in difficult situations. We find ourselves in health situations or job situations or relationship challenges, and we don't want to be there. And the question we're asking is, how can I find God in these moments? Let me give you an illustration of this. It's a story that I read about years ago. It's the story of a husband and wife. Their names are Joy and Les, and that's not intended to be funny. It kind of is, Joy, Les, but that's not the point of the story. So Joy and Les met when they were younger. They fell in love, and they got married. One of the things that Joy appreciated about Les, in addition to his kindness and his quietness and his sense of humor, was she noted that he had a particular scent that she liked. He smelled a certain way. Joy and Les, they got married and they decided to go to college together. They were both interested in the medical field. He became a doctor, she became a nurse. They had 3 kids. And as they continued on, she noticed that his scent was changing. And she thought he was maybe just bringing something home from the hospital while he was working as a doctor. And so in this story, she describes nagging him for a long time to bathe better, to kind of smell better. Over the years, Joy noticed that it wasn't just her husband's smell that was changing, his mood was changing as well. And he was becoming a little bit more irritable, and he was even being a bit forgetful about the times he was irritable. Both of them being in the medical field, they said, we need to go get this checked out. They checked it out and they found out that he was just in the beginning stages of Parkinson's disease. It was devastating for them both, and they both decided, all right, we're going to do our best to labor through this. And as they continued on during the years, Joy found herself in a support group with some other people who had relatives that had Parkinson's. And during one of those times, she brought up this story about him having a particularly different scent than he had earlier, and some of the other people in the group brought up the same thing. She started noticing some connections, and given her interest in the medical field, started doing some research. They went and met with a specialized doctor, and they found out that while her husband had Parkinson's disease, Joy had something called hyperosmia, which is a heightened sense of smell. Joy realized that she may have smelled his Parkinson's disease before it started taking effect. So they got together with some researchers, and Joy went through some studies. Now, this is going to sound kind of gross, but they gave Joy, in a research setting, 10 shirts of men. 5 of them had Parkinson's, 5 of them didn't, and she was not told. She accurately identified 5 out of the 10 shirts as belonging to someone with Parkinson's. After the research study was done, they told her, well, actually, only 4 of the men had Parkinson's. The 5th one didn't. That man came back to her 2 years later and said, hey, I just got diagnosed with Parkinson's. Joy had an ability, a gift. And in some ways, it wasn't pleasant. It stank, right? But she had this ability where, for her husband, and later, in 2019, she co-authored a study where they started a process of seeing if they could identify Parkinson's disease early on through a cotton swab on the back of the neck. Joy was responsible not only in helping her husband, but she is now responsible for leading the way in new research in an attempt to help hundreds and thousands of people. But it was based on a rare gift and a unique situation and an unpleasant one. The way God worked with Joy is in a lot of ways the way God works with us. God gives us gifts and abilities, some of them unexpected and surprising, and then places us in situations where we are uniquely available to God to help people right around us as well as people far away. Here's the main idea I want to share with you today. We can be available to serve God in unexpected, surprising ways. Let's look at a story from the Bible that points us to this. Here's the story we're going to look at. It's the story of Esther. Now you might say, well, where can we find it in the Bible? There's no Bible reference. Well, this is the Bible reference, actually. There's an entire book of the Bible called Esther, and it's her story. It's 9 chapters, and it is one of the most riveting, evocative stories with all kinds of twists and turns. It's so powerful that it is read every year during the Jewish feast of Purim, and it's read out loud, and it's an engaging story, and I want to encourage you to read this story on your own. In fact, somebody from our congregation who was here at 9 o'clock got up, got some coffee, went into the lobby, and read the book of Esther. This is a great book. Let me give you the highlights of this story. It takes place around 483 BC. We kind of know the time zone because the book itself tells us at what point in history it took place. I told you this time of exile that God's people are in. They're removed from their land of Israel and they're deported to this area of the Babylonian Empire. That's what we've been reading about in the stories of Daniel and from the book of Jeremiah. Well, all that changes when we get to the book of Esther because the Babylonian Empire has been swallowed up now by the Persian Empire. A massive, powerful empire. And here's how the story of Esther begins. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa. You can go on the internet, and you can look this up. Archaeologists believe they have found this palace, and it is massive. And you can tell the opulence, and the next part of the story shows us how King Xerxes used his opulence. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days, a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. This shows us his power and privilege. The next section shows us his character. On the 7th day of the feast, when King Xerxes was high in spirits because of his wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him to bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. This is written very sanitized. We believe that what's being said here is that Xerxes wanted to parade Queen Vashti around with only the crown on her head. And what he's doing is he's objectifying his queen as this drunken king wants to parade his wife around in front of men. We don't know a lot about Vashti, but we know from the next part of the story, she's had enough of this. She's tolerated this king's misbehavior, and she's now drawing a line. It says, when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. Not only were you not allowed to enter the room with the king unless called, you were definitely never allowed to say no. When she did this, some of the king's associates came alongside and said, if the queen says no to the king, all the women in the kingdom will say no to their husbands. Not only was the king offended, but he was scared. And he decides this is not the right king. This is not the right queen. He banishes her, and we never hear from her again. The king decides, I need a more submissive woman. I need a queen that's worthy of me. Now we switch from Persian royalty to the Jewish exiles that are living in Susa. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother had died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. Mordecai lives in the area of the fortress of Susa. He works for the king in some capacity. And given the fact that his adopted daughter is lovely and beautiful, she, like many young women in that area, would have been vulnerable to being abducted and used by the king. And that's exactly what happens. Esther, along with many other women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. Now, she's placed in the harem, and this Haggai is probably a male eunuch. He's a desexualized male who's responsible for caring for all the women that have been gathered together for the king to sample and select from. They're enclosed by a wall, but Haggai seems to take a liking to Esther and is kind of taking care of her. And Mordecai is coming by daily to talk to her and send messages to her over the wall. And Mordecai encourages Esther, don't tell them you're Jewish. He imagined that this would be a unique problem in the harem. The next part of the story is interpreted in different ways. It says this: before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments. So some of you familiar with the story of Esther, you might have heard this as Esther really gets splurged on by 12 months of beauty treatments in the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire is well known for its opulence and beauty and decadence, and she basically had a 12-month spa treatment where and there's descriptions of different things that happen. I mean, what an amazing opportunity for a young woman. That's one side of the interpretation. The other side of the interpretation is She has just been trafficked, and she will now spend 12 months being refashioned into whatever would be the pleasures that the king wants, including her forced birth control methods. I think the truth is somewhere in between. And after 12 months, it's Esther's turn. This is what it says. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign. And then it says the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. This is a strange turn of events. You have this young Jewish exile living her ethnic identity in secret, who is now the queen of the Persian Empire. Right around this time, Mordecai gets wind of an assassination attempt against Xerxes, and he stops it. And the king finds out and elevates Mordecai. So now Esther and Mordecai have the king's favor. The problem with that is the king's officials get jealous, particularly of Mordecai, and there's one official in particular who gets jealous of Mordecai, and now we're introduced to the true villain of the story. His name is Haman. Yeah. Someone just booed here, Torrance, somebody just booed here, and here's why. Because when the story of Esther is read every year during Purim, children are encouraged to boo out loud when they hear the name of Haman read. And they also have these noise makers that they spin around when his name's mentioned to try to drown out his name. So for the rest of the story, when I read the name Haman, I want to invite you to boo out loud. So let's try it. Haman. Very good, very good. So here's this official who is now jealous, and he decides, not only am I going to take out Mordecai, I'm going to take out everybody like Mordecai. When Haman approached King Xerxes and said, there's a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of other people. They refuse to obey the laws of the king. If it please the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed. The king thinks that this sounds like a good idea, so he sends out dispatches. Dispatches were sent by swift messengers to all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day. This was scheduled to happen on March 7th of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. Now remember, Esther is Jewish, but she hasn't revealed her identity. But she's right there in the palace. She can stop this. Maybe. Mordecai hears about this dispatch, and he sends a message to Esther. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther: don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you'll escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at this time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. And then there's a sentence, and if you've been with us before, when you read Bible stories, sometimes there's what I would call a hinge sentence in a story, that you hear this sentence and it kind of tells you what the whole point of the story is about. Here it is, it's from Mordecai. He says, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Esther, maybe this is why you're here. Maybe this is why you were kidnapped. Maybe this is why you were stuck in that harem. Maybe this is why that 12 months led to you being with this man. Maybe it's for this moment. says, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it's against the law, I will go in and see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Esther has this moment. She has the heart of the king, but so did Vashti. And we saw what happened to her. What's going to happen? Esther goes in and reveals her Jewish identity. And then she says this, if I have found favor with the king, if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. What's the king's response? He suddenly realized this woman that he loves is part of this diabolical plan that one of his agents has created. The king responds, who would do such a thing? King Xerxes demanded. The king explained, will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. You can imagine, he's like, who put this hit out on everybody? Including my queen. You think my queen is involved in this? Who did this? Looked over to Haman, and immediately a bag is put over his head. He's dragged out and he's executed. And interestingly, he's executed in the same way he planned to execute Mordecai. The tables had turned again. The king pronounces a decree that protects the Jewish people. Mordecai is promoted again. And not only that, the king gives permission to all the Jewish people to fight if they are being attacked by anybody else in the kingdom. And they take the initiative to protect themselves. It's a revolutionary, jarring, and surprising story of twists and turns, but it reminds us of this essential truth. We can be available to serve God in unexpected and surprising ways. Esther was, and that's how God does it in our lives too. Here's a couple of points I want you to think about based on this story. One, do this. Recognize the uniqueness of your story, including your unique challenges. Every one of us has a story, and every one of us has gifts and abilities and talents that are good and wonderful that we all have that have been given to us by God. We also have a bunch of challenges, a bunch of obstacles, a lot of pain, a lot of negative experiences, and those are used by God as well. Esther was young, beautiful, and wise. She was also born in exile. She lost her parents. She was kidnapped. She was exploited. She feared execution. And God used all that, not just to rescue her, but to rescue thousands and thousands of other people. She didn't view any of these things as a barrier to God's plans. But sometimes we do. Sometimes we think the problems in our life are barriers to God's plan. Not true. In fact, here's an action step for you. Begin to question your assumption that challenges block God's plan. It doesn't. Lost my dad when I was 11 years old. It created in me a sense of empathy and care that led me to my first career in chaplaincy. I was naturally gifted to speak and communicate. It was only when I turned 18, where, as my mom puts it, God turned on Jason's light, that I saw these speaking abilities being used for an eternal purpose. My struggles with anxiety and OCD have actually helped me become more resilient, more confident, more focused. What are the challenges you're facing that you may think create an obstacle for God using you? It might even be those scripts that roll around in your head like this. You think, I'm too broken. You think, I'm not prepared. I'm damaged goods. I don't know enough. I might screw it up. Or you look around and you go, I don't think they know the true me. You know what the problem with these is? They all start with I. Every one of our self-statements should be starting with God. God made me. God used me. God has a plan for me. God wants to adopt me. God has equipped me. And God takes those terrible situations we're in, those nightmare moments in the past as well as in the present and later in the future. God works in and through them. I talked to somebody after the service today, and they said, there are no circumstances, there are no coincidences. God uses all those circumstances. It's a great way of doing it. How do you need to challenge those voices in your head or those voices that are coming out of other people in your life? God may be using all these things for such a time as this. Maybe you're in that terrible job for such a time as this. Maybe you're in that tough class or that tough season of school for such a time as this. There's some other purpose there. Maybe you went through that terrible thing years ago for this moment. Being open to seeing God working through all that stuff. And then what happens when we realize it? Then we have a choice to make. That's the other point I want to share with you today. When God's loving plan is made clear, act bravely. Mordecai said to Esther, hey, you have a decision to make. And perhaps you're queen for this moment. Some of us know what we need to do. We're here today. We know it. You know it. You need to make that. If you're like me, you overthink it. Stop overthinking it. You know what you need to do. You know you need to get out of that abusive relationship. You know you have to make that decision. You know you have to stop drinking. Just do it again. You know you need to apologize to that person. You know you need to get your life right with God. That's why you're here. You know it. Do it. And if you overthink it, you're like, I don't know where God is. I'm having a hard time identifying where God is. I haven't heard anything clearly. You know what I love about the book of Esther? The book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that you'll read that the name God, the word God, never appears in the entire book. It's the only book in the Bible where God is not written, but God's all over it. Even if you can't pinpoint, now where's God exactly? God's governing your life. God was governing your life before you were ever born. Got great plans for you. Make the decision. And do this. Pray daily to see with God's eyes and act with God's courage. I love what Esther did. When she knew she had to do something, she was like, pray for me. Go get people to pray for me. And she said, fast. You know what that means? Instead of eating a meal, pray. Some of us need to call our friends and just say, look, I got a big decision to make. I don't know how it's going to turn out. It could be a bigger challenge for me than I realize. Would you skip a meal and instead of eating, spend that time praying for me? And find somebody that takes a long time eating, not the short one. You're like, it takes me 2 hours. Great, I want you. Oh, I eat in 5 minutes. Forget it. Like find somebody, say, would you skip a meal and pray for me instead? And some of you might need to do it too. You might be like, hey, I need to fast. Instead of eating this meal, I'm going to pray. And I'm going to devote myself because God's going to give me direction so that I can act with courage. And why should we do this? For this reason, because we can be available to serve God in unexpected and surprising ways. You know what is usually the barrier to that? Our own perception. Instead, recognize the uniqueness of your story, including the challenges. Well, God can't use me because I'm like this, or I have this experience, or I don't have this experience. God's working through every one of us. Make a list. Here's my strengths. Here's my challenges. Then look at that list and say, God's going to use all this. And then, when God's loving plan is clear, do it. Act bravely. Make that decision. And it might be a decision today. You know what God wants to do with those problems and difficulties and hardships in life? God's in the business of doing this. It's one religious word. It's great. It's a word called redemption. You know what I think of when I hear the word redemption? I think of Redemption Center, where I take my bottles and my Coke cans and things like that, you know? You know why it's called a redemption center? The word redemption means exchange. Redemption is when you take something that is perceived to be not valuable and you exchange it and it becomes valuable. God wants to take those things in your life that you think, well, this isn't worth anything. This would never turn out good. This is a bad thing. This is something I should get rid of. This is something I should forget about. God's like, bring it to me and I will redeem it and I will turn it into something powerful and beautiful that will not only impact your life, but will impact hundreds of other people's lives. And perhaps that difficult job you're in, that challenging season in your relationship, those difficult teachers, that health crisis, that financial struggle you're in right now, or the place you're in the culture, perhaps you are here for such a time as this. Let's be open to God working in and through us in unexpected and surprising ways. Let's close our service today with praying for that. Would you all stand with me? And at Torrance, would you stand up? Maybe you're one of those people who are like, yeah, and I need some prayer, I need some wisdom. Right after the service, right over here at Torrance and here in Manhattan Beach, we're going to have some volunteers who want to pray with you and for you. Let me pray for us as we go out this week, because God has a great plan to work in our lives. God, thank you that nothing with you is wasted. Thank you that you have this incredible ability to redeem our hardships. You never waste a hurt. God, we open our hearts and minds and we say, would you help us to see things through your eyes and to operate with your courage? You have us where we're at for a reason, and it's go time. Help us to see those opportunities right in front of us as we go out this week. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you, everybody. Have a great weekend.